Vasily Nabinzia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. The video is up on Infowars.com and Newswars.com right now. This broke this morning, and it's only gotten coverage on Infowars.com and Newswars.com, which is insane here in the United States. It's gotten coverage worldwide. This is the main Russian ambassador to the UN, and in a lengthy transcript republished on Infowars.com, he lays out the exact rebel groups funded by the United States to carry out the staged chemical attack a few days ago that is being used as the pretext to then strike Russian forces inside Syria. And now President Trump has said that he is planning to strike, or looking at striking, 70 targets. It was 24 targets yesterday. You've got the neocons, you've got the Democratic Party, you've got the mainstream media, CNN, just drooling. The same people that funded the Arab Spring, that promoted the Arab Spring, that killed over 1 million people, George Soros, they are so anti-Russian because Russia pulled out of the whole globalist system. It is incredible. Now, I don't just believe the Russians when they say this particular rebel group funded by the West staged this. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. We have seen in the last 5 years Al-Qaeda and ISIS forces caught staging chemical attacks. It's even come out in the United Nations. And because the jihadis want to be rock stars, so when they launch the chemical mortar attacks, when they do these attacks, always targeting civilians to get maximum coverage in the media, to show dying children gulping for air like fish out of water, they scream Allah Akbar and fire the mortars and then promote it on their ISIS and Al-Qaeda channels to then be rock stars in their own community, knowing that CNN will cover it up and say that it was Russia or Assad in Syria that did it. But let's be clear. The West started the war 6 years ago, the Arab Spring. Obama and Hillary and others funded the takedown of Libya, then the attack on Syria, Egypt, our ally, putting radical jihadists in power that blew up churches all over the Middle East, that engaged in all these crimes. Our own military and Rand Paul and other senators like Ted Cruz came out and said, this is wrong. We're not Al-Qaeda's Air Force. They said, oh God, America's awake to the fact that we're aiding Al-Qaeda with Saudi Arabia taking over the Middle East, namely Syria, the doorway to Europe through Turkey. Let's rename it ISIS or Islamic State. And so here we are now 4 years after that rebranding. The Russians have crushed ISIS. They announced a month ago, in the next 2 months we'll be totally pulled out. Well, the globalists running the U.S. and countermanding the president's orders waited until most of the Russians pulled out, so there's not a real force to crush, and then prepare 70 targets, including more than 20 that are Russian naval base that's been there for 50 years, their only naval base in the Mediterranean, and Russian air bases, and then civilian contractor bases for infrastructure. So Assad and Russia, along with some U.S. help, won the war against Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And then Russia announces, we're leaving. We're going to follow the agreement we made with the U.S. military 5 years ago, outside of Obama's operations, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dempsey, set up. We're going with the agreement. We've kicked out the Al-Qaeda ISIS forces. We're leaving. The response by the John McCain neocon Obama globalist arm is to then have rebel forces they control, and I've studied these groups, same group staged one of these chemical attacks before, launch a chemical attack right as the Russians are leaving and peace is about to break out. The globalists have wanted to destabilize the Middle East. They've wanted to bring down Syria, that final piece of the domino, they believe, to blow the doors of Europe open, because it borders Europe, to allow the full collapse of Europe and the Islamic invasion. This is part of a larger UN plan. We've got 10 million people just the last 5 years that have come into Europe, 80% of them military-age men. But here's the article on Infowars.com. Headline, video, Russia accuses U.S. of training jihadists to stage chemical attacks in Syria. We call upon Western politicians to scale down their hawkish rhetoric. Putin says he thinks that common sense will prevail. I'm not a Russophile. I'm not a Putin follower. I'm a reality follower, a truth follower. I was in D.C. today with former CIA contractors and a bunch of folks, patriots, and they were saying absolutely you wouldn't target 40-something civilians with nerve gas if you were Assad when you're winning. That's a black eye. That makes you look bad. None of them. When I was in a room of former Navy SEALs and Marine Force Recon and Army Special Operations, none of their friends are buying it. They all see through it. These guys will tell you what they really think. We ran into folks at the airport that were former military officers. They were like, this is pure crap. Our military 5 years ago after Benghazi said, we're not Al-Qaeda's air force in Syria. We're not going to be part of this. But that was the resupply at Benghazi of those warehouses of shoulder-fire missiles and anti-tank tow missiles and the rest of it. So this is complex stuff. But when you pull back, Russia announces they're pulling back. They're pulling out. Trump announces 2 weeks later, 2 weeks ago. So about a month ago, the Russians announced they're pulling out, or 5 weeks ago. Then a few weeks later, Trump announces he's pulling out. Pentagon flips out, says you can't do that. He's like, we're ending the war. Syria didn't start a war. Obama was wrong to found ISIS and do all this, like he said during the campaign. Trump has a big argument with the Joint Chief of Staff, says this has to end. He fires McMaster. Then magically a chemical weapons attack happens that the rebels witness and videotape for Netflix, as usual. It's like Running Mad Dog Ben Richards is killing the food riot. It's total crap. And then you can see the motive, the history. The Russians and Assad would never do this. Syria is very close to Russia's borders. It's trying to secure its borders, just like Europe should be securing its borders. Here's the Russian border. Here's the European borders. This is just common sense stuff, but the globalists sit above the nation state. They're trying to destabilize things. So go see Vasily Nabinzia's, I'm not saying that right, Russian ambassador to the UN. Go see his 20-minute speech. Go read the transcript at Infowars.com. And he goes over the entire thing here and says, criminal elements of the deep state in the United States have staged this false flag. We know they armed the rebels. We know they were getting ready with chemical weapons. We have intelligence operatives watching them. And now it's happened. Please don't attack our forces or we're going to have to fight back against your forces. We're just trying to pull out. But if you kill our troops on the ground and if you bomb our ships, what are we supposed to do? We're going to fight back. And John McCain and the neocons want to derail Trump. They want to put him under as much pressure as possible, claiming he's a Russian agent. So prove you're a tough guy. The sanctions aren't enough. The U.S. troops on the Russian border aren't enough. U.S. energy policy, crushing Russia isn't enough. Something Obama and Hillary never did. Nothing's enough unless Trump nukes the whole planet. We all die to prove he's not a Russian agent. That's where we are as a society and as a culture. So this is my emergency message to President Trump and to people that have connections to the president. We know his new Twitter feeds, bashing the Russians, calling Assad a murderer, calling him a dirtbag, are an attempt to look tough to the neocons and the U.S. media. When he actually doesn't launch a very dangerous strike on Russians, they say they'll retaliate with. I understand it's that. But it's not statesmanlike. It's so WWE and so stupid to sit here and even go along with this when not once, not twice, but 3 times we have caught the neocon-funded jihadis and the Obama-funded jihadis, bipartisan criminality, launching chemical attacks when Obama said 4 years ago, 5 years ago, it's my red line. If there's a chemical attack, we'll invade. And then the jihadis launch a chemical attack against the Assad forces and then blame it on them, but they didn't get caught doing it. They did it 2 more times. The UN admitted it. The Pentagon's come out. Do you understand how dangerous this is? So my emergency message to the president is this. Listeners of our show, people on Twitter, people on Facebook, people on YouTube, you've got to call the White House. You've got to call Congress. And to all the people shadow banning us on Twitter, Facebook, and Google, are you freaking maniacs, man? I've got 4 children. I understand the Cuban Missile Crisis. I know history. This is just as dangerous. What are we even, forget who did the chemical attack. What are we doing triggering an Arab Spring, trying to overthrow Syria, having Benghazi staged to resupply weapons out of Libya to Syria, overthrowing our allies in places like Egypt, staging an Arab Spring to bring down Europe, It's the communist Chinese allied with the radical Islamicists and the globalists who believe they're going to bring down Europe and the U.S. It's madness. This is World War IV. World War III, according to even the CIA, was the Cold War. This is the new war. It's migrational. It's populations. It's economic. It's borderless systems. It's cyber warfare. But then it's backed up with false flags and then regional conflicts that lead to wider wars. Every major historian and futurist who's worth their salt, basically everybody, has said the same political alignments we saw before World War I and World War II have happened again. The stars have aligned for war. So if you love your family, if you have common sense, you need to be getting this video and this article and the material and the information out. And don't believe me, go watch the main ambassador to the UN from Russia laying it all out at Infowars.com with the video. So my message to Trump is, you've done a great job getting sovereignty back to the U.S., getting us out of the TPP, removing some of the globalist tariffs that made business here impossible. We know you're a good guy, but I got to be honest. Watching Trump do this, I know he's not a Russian agent, but I know that with the women and his past, which nobody judges you for, they've got leverage, and clearly the deep state, the swamp, is now pulling Trump down. And they are licking their lips because McCain and others, it's not about humans working together and going to the stars and unlimited resources and ideas. Just like with Hitler or the Soviet Union or the Communist Chinese, it's all about domination and beating everybody. And if we don't dominate Russia and overthrow them, if we don't use every leverage against them and use radical Muslims to attack them, then we're weak if we don't destroy them. But the very same globalists are trying to destroy America. They're using the very same Islamic system to take us over. They know that the demographics of Muslims are 1.5 billion people, about to be 3 billion in 20 years. And I was in the big, Ronald Reagan Airport today, and everybody that screened me was a Muslim, and they all had hoods on, and they were all there, and it's such a joke. We do this because of the radical Muslims, and then they run everything. And then in Europe, they're above the law, and the deal's been made. Europe's dying, America's dying. We only have like 1.5 kids on average, whatever. So we don't repopulate with South Americans or with people from even Japan who isn't having kids, or Africa. We do it with radical Islamicists because Islamicists are under political control of their leaders, and the globalists can use them because they're authoritarian, just like Carol Quigley wrote. And so Trump's instincts of fighting this Islamic takeover of America with Hollywood linked up with it, so sick, and the feminists linked up with it, so sick, with George Soros funding. You're like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. It's about power. It's about control. And now the Russian ambassador says, we have evidence. Well, they didn't just say this today. They said this months ago. They said, we have evidence. We're ready to show the UN, if it happens, that criminal elements of the U.S. government deep state are funding this particular Al-Qaeda-affiliated, ISIS-affiliated group to launch chemical attacks when we try to pull out to try to start a new war. And we're warning America this is about to happen. And then you look at the motive, the Russians are leaving. And this happens. So it's on Infowars.com. Get it out to people. And shame on Twitter, shame on YouTube, shame on Facebook, shame on the big telecoms, shame on big tech, shame on it all. You won't even let Americans go online and say, this is what the Russians are saying, and this is the others, because you want a damn war. And if we get a nuclear winter, and the elites are all moving to New Zealand like it's going to happen, shame on all the leftists and all the right-wingers and everybody that went along with this BS. People ask why I supported Trump, because he was a maverick and trying to kickstart the country's heart and trying to defibrillate the nation. And I knew he wasn't perfect, but I knew the establishment was against him. But I'll throw Trump away like an old shoe if he becomes this warmongering whore of the establishment, God damn it. But I know this, you leftists don't care. You're all about raw power. Even if it destroys the planet. You're not leftist, you're shameful warmongers. And you're the ones pushing Trump with this Russian narrative towards war. And most of you are bots, so it doesn't matter. They act like Russians invented bots. Give me a frickin' break. Sock puppets. Bullhorns. Covered them 18, 19 years ago online. We first exposed avatars. One guy programs it, and it's 1,000 tentacles out there to create the illusion of an army. We see through that. Whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Asian, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're man or woman, or trans or whatever, gay or straight, you don't want nuclear war. You don't want this BS. But they always had the left against war with Russia, back when the left ran Russia. Now the left wants war, the neocons want war, and it's this perfect, crazy, existential thing, because the left can kill some Christians. That's what Russia and the Soviets was all about, was killing Christians. In Russia and outside, then they can have it. So a lot of you are too spiritually gone, but I'm just here reaching out to folks that can hear. So, what's the right way to pronounce this, Ambassador? Come over here. It's Vasily Nabenzia. Is that right? Here's what he had to say. There's the full transcript, the full 20-minute speech is on Infowars.com, and this is the mouth of Putin. So this is what Putin's saying in our emergency transmission to President Trump. Also, information is surfacing that Al-Tamf camp, American instructors have trained a number of groups of fighters to stage provocations with chemical weapons used to create a pretext for a strike. It was clear to us that attempts to shelter terrorists at the same time punish the regime so hated by some Western capitals would soon or later be undertaken. Speaking heads, those talking heads on television screens, sought to repeat last year's strike against Syria. This morning, there were strikes against T4 airfield in Hamas province. We are deeply troubled by such actions. Provocations in Doma echo last year's incidents in Qam Shikonon and the unifying aspect of the fact that there is a planned nature of these attacks. An analysis of the USS operations prior and after the event in the city in April 2007 shows that Washington, ahead of time, prepared its operation, the USS Porter, naval destroyer, with 4 to 7 April last year. This is the toxic substance used before the strike against the airbase. We already were present in the Mediterranean waters where they engaged in planned operations. They did not enter the ports where the exchange of munitions could have happened in order to increase the number of cruise missiles. So again, they're training them to carry out chemical weapons provocations. Russia's leaving. ISIS is defeated. The globalists want to break that country up to control the Mediterranean, control those pipelines. The West is starting a war with Russia, not with China that owns Hollywood, not with China that did the hacking of the Office of Personnel Management, which was 20-something million people's identities. Nothing compared to Zuckerberg and all this other crap that's a diversion. The world's lining up for a new world war. And old psychopaths with big fat brain tumors like McCain have this giant heart-on that they run America and they'll show the Russians. And because we have the power to destroy the world, well, everybody better get out of our frickin' way. Instead of humans working together and being strong. The globalists want us to give up our sovereignty, our borders, but then they tell us, let's go have war with Russia nationalistically. It's all a lie. So that's the big news here, that none of our media is reporting on the Russians saying it's a false flag and the evidence in history showing it was. Let's go over here to a map. So, we know they got us into Iraq lying about babies in incubators. Not that Iraq was perfect, but this had to be taken down to stabilize the region. Then they had the Arab Spring to take down Egypt and Libya and so many others. Then Syria, which is the gateway to Turkey and the gateway to Europe, Eastern and Western Europe. Turkey wants this brought down and to be broken off where Saudi Arabia has a piece, Iraq has a piece with the new ISIS stronghold. That's a new base of operations for Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabis to launch attacks into Eastern Europe. Turkey's opened the door right into Western Europe. Now that's the admitted plan. And right now there are a whole bunch of U.S. ships with missiles and aircraft saying they've got 70 targets they're going to hit of Russian soldiers on the ground that help the Syrian government in Damascus and Aleppo and other areas kick them out. So the whole globalist plan to destabilize the Middle East that Wesley Clark talked about 10 years ago has been stopped. ISIS has basically been minimized by 95%. They're restabilizing the country. The Russians go, fine. As part of what we said, we're leaving. We've got our one port here. It's been here for 50, 60 years. The U.S. deep state that's controlling our country says, we're going to hit your port, we're going to hit your bases, we're going to kill a bunch of Russians, we're going to start a war with you. When our own military 5 years ago double-crossed Obama and the globalists and said, we're not going to be part of this. We're going to side with you to kick Al-Qaeda and ISIS out. We're not going to be their Air Force or Army. But they think we've all forgotten, just like Gruber said, thank God Americans are so dumb. But if they start the war here and they attack Russian forces, they'll attack our ships. Then there'll be other strikes, and that's boom, boom, boom. Within hours, it turns into a thermonuclear war in most war game scenarios. And that's why when you go to bed tonight, I should have just started this whole broadcast with, if you like nuclear war and you like starving to death, because we got these weapons, just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. If you like nuclear war and starving to death, this is a good way. Also, some old guy named John McCain, who the Democrats and Republicans say is their God, can be all powerful and believe he defeated Russia before he died. Or George Soros, who hates the fact that Russia isn't under his control, can have his way. So Russia says it's a false flag. They've caught the rebels doing it before. They have the motive. They have the means. What do you say? Get these videos on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube out. I'll be on the radio, Lord willing, a 36-hour emergency broadcast. Stop World War IV. We already had World War III. But stop worldwide nuclear war, kicking off at 8 a.m. tomorrow with myself, David Knight, Owen Schroyer, and many others. We're going to have Pentagon experts on, Russian experts, German experts, UK experts, all of it tomorrow. This is serious, but pray for peace, folks, because Trump is being maneuvered when he full well knows it's a false flag into striking Russian forces and is putting out horrible tweets. We hope are just rhetorical, so he doesn't have to do the physical attacks. It's a very serious time. My message to President Trump is, America will stand with you no matter what horse crap they've made up or what they've got on you. But you cannot go along with this. You can feel the energy in the air. The globalists always start wars to try to get power. World War I, World War II. They had the big Cold War and all the rest of it. But now World War IV, an informational war, is here. Let's not let them kick it to the next level. Nationalism is burgeoning everywhere. The big mega banks are losing control. So now they want the war. So to conservatives, to so-called liberals, to all of you, let's get past the partisanship. Let's get serious and look at the facts. The video of the ambassador, all the facts. Myself in front of the White House in D.C. today. All of it's broken down on Infowars.com and Newswars.com right now. I seriously got on an airplane today at like 1 p.m., not knowing that when I got off there wouldn't be mushroom clouds. And other experts are saying we are at the most dangerous point in human history. Let's take this serious and not take it for granted, or we got a serious problem on our hands. My gut tells me we are at maximum danger point right now, and if people don't get active and call C-SPAN and call the White House and call everywhere else and say, stop it, goddammit, then we're all damned to hell. I'll be back tomorrow, Lord willing. It's up to you to get the information out. Thank you.